My name is Nelson Mandela. Rolilahla means troublemaker in my native Xhosa language. Perhaps destiny was already whispering my future the day I was born. I did not come into this world as a president, a global icon, or a symbol of freedom. I entered it as a boy in a small rural village, unaware that my life would one day be tied to the fate of an entire nation. I was born on July 18, 1918, in Mvezo, a tiny village along the Mbash River in South Africa. The land was beautiful, rolling hills, open skies, and the rhythm of traditional life. My people lived close to the earth. We respected elders, honored ancestors, and believed deeply in community. No one stood alone. From those early days, I learned a lesson that would guide me forever. A person is a person through other people. My father was a respected chief and advisor to the Thembu royal family. He was a proud man, strong in character, and fearless in his words. When I was still young, he lost his position after defying a colonial magistrate. That act of resistance cost our family status and comfort, but it planted something powerful inside me. I saw that dignity mattered more than obedience, and justice mattered more than fear. When my father died, my life changed forever. I was sent to live with Chief Jongantaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. He treated me not as a servant, but as a son. In his home, I observed leadership up close. I watched disputes resolved through discussion, patience, and respect. No one raised their voice. Everyone was heard. That was my first education in democracy, long before I knew the word. At school, I was given the name Nelson by a teacher. It was common practice for African children to receive English names, as if our own were too difficult, too foreign, too unworthy. At the time, I accepted it without question. Only later did I understand what that small act represented: a system designed to erase identity. As I grew older, I began to notice the invisible walls around me. I saw signs that told me where I could go and where I could not. I noticed how white people spoke to black people, with authority, with assumption, with ownership. I did not yet know the word apartheid, but I felt its weight every day. Education became my escape and my awakening. I attended Fort Hare University, one of the few institutions where black South Africans could receive higher education. It was there that my political consciousness truly began. For the first time, I met young men and women who questioned authority, who spoke openly about injustice, who believed that South Africa could be something better than what it was. But rebellion comes with consequences. I was expelled from Fort Hare for participating in a student protest against unfair policies. When I returned home, the regent informed me that he had arranged a marriage for me, according to tradition. I respected our customs, but I could not accept a life chosen for me. So I did something bold, perhaps reckless. I ran away. I fled to Johannesburg, a city that pulsed with energy and cruelty in equal measure. There I saw apartheid in its rawest form. Black men digging gold beneath the earth while others grew rich above it. Families separated by past laws. Dreams crushed by color. I worked as a night watchman, a clerk, anything to survive. Eventually, I began studying law. The law fascinated me, not because it was just, but because it had the power to shape lives. I wanted to understand the weapon used against my people, so that one day I could turn it toward justice. In Johannesburg, I met Walter Sisulu, a man who would become my mentor, my brother, and my guide into political life. Through him, I was introduced to the African National Congress, ANC. Joining the ANC was not a dramatic moment. There were no trumpets, no ceremonies. But it was the most important decision of my life. At that time, the ANC believed in polite petitions and respectful appeals to a government that had no respect for us. Many of us, especially the younger generation, felt this approach was too weak. We were tired of asking for rights that should never have been denied. So, in 1944, we formed the ANC Youth League. We were angry, but we were disciplined. We were radical, but we were strategic. We believed in mass action, in mobilizing people, in refusing to cooperate with unjust laws. We believed that freedom would not be handed to us. We would have to take responsibility for claiming it. Around this time, I married Evelyn Mace and started a family. Balancing political struggle with personal life was never easy. My children saw less of me than they deserved. My wife carried burdens she never asked for. This is a truth I do not hide. The fight for freedom demands sacrifices, not only from leaders but from their families. In 1952, the ANC launched the Defiance Campaign, a nationwide movement where ordinary people deliberately broke unjust laws, peacefully, openly, and together. We filled prisons. We filled headlines. For the first time, the world began to notice South Africa. That same year, I became South Africa's first black law partner, opening a firm with Oliver Tambo. Our office was always full. People came not just for legal advice, but for hope. We defended those who had no voice. Every case reminded me why this struggle mattered, but the government responded with fear. They banned me from attending meetings. They restricted my movement. They tried to isolate me. Instead, they made me stronger. In 1955, representatives from across the country gathered to adopt the Freedom Charter. Its words were simple but revolutionary. South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. For saying this, we were accused of treason. The treason trial lasted years. Though we were eventually acquitted, the message was clear. The state would use the law to crush dissent. Peaceful resistance was met with violence. Dialogue was met with bullets. Then came 1960. In the town of Sharpeville, police opened fire on unarmed protesters. 69 people were killed. Most were shot in the back. That day changed me forever. I had spent my life believing in peaceful protest. But I now faced a terrible question. What do you do when peaceful protest is answered with massacre? After long and painful debate, we formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation. Our goal was sabotage, not terror. We targeted symbols of apartheid, not people. It was not a decision made lightly, but oppression leaves few choices. In 1962, I was arrested. In 1964, after the Rivonia trial, I stood before the court knowing I might die in prison. I spoke not to the judge but to history. I said I cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. And I said, calmly, truthfully, that it was an ideal for which I was prepared to die. Instead, I was sentenced to life imprisonment. As I was led away, I did not know that I would spend the next 27 years behind bars. I did not know how many funerals I would miss, how many moments of my children's lives would pass without me, how many times despair would knock on my door in the middle of the night. But even then, I knew one thing with certainty. The struggle was bigger than me. When the prison gates closed behind me, the sound echoed louder than any gunshot I had ever heard. It was the sound of time being taken from me. It was the sound of the state declaring that my life now belonged to them. I was sent to Robben Island, a bleak strip of land surrounded by icy waters and merciless winds. The island was designed not just to imprison the body, but to break the spirit. From the very first day, it was clear. We were not meant to survive as men. We were meant to exist as shadows. My cell was small, bare, cold, a thin mat on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a tiny window that allowed little light and even less hope. At night, the cold crept into my bones. During the day, the sun reflected off white limestone in the quarry, burning our eyes and damaging our vision permanently. We were forced into hard labor, breaking stones under the open sky. Talking was forbidden. Looking guards in the eye was considered disrespect. We were called by numbers, not names. Identity, they believed, could be erased through repetition. But what the architects of apartheid never understood was this. Prison can lock the body, but it cannot imprison ideas. From the very beginning, I made a decision. I would not allow bitterness to consume me. Anger is natural, but hatred corrodes the vessel that holds it. I knew that if I walked out of prison one day filled with revenge, then the prison would have won. So instead, I observed. I studied the guards, their fears, their ignorance, their quiet doubts. Many of them were young white men who had been taught that we were dangerous, inferior, less than human. I spoke to them respectfully, not submissively, but firmly. Slowly, some began to see us differently. Inside prison, we created a university. We taught one another history, politics, economics, and philosophy. I studied Afrikaans, the language of my oppressors, not to please them, but to understand them. To negotiate with an enemy, you must first learn how they think. Years passed. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. Outside the prison walls, the world was changing, but we felt it only through whispers. Smuggled messages, secret signals, the rare visit. Each fragment of news reminded me that the struggle was alive. Inside, the authorities tried everything. They isolated us. They moved us. They restricted visits. They denied medical care. But pressure does not always destroy. Sometimes it refines. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the world began to turn its eyes toward South Africa. Protests erupted across continents. Students marched in the United States. Artists refused to perform in Sun City. Governments imposed sanctions. The name Mandela became a rallying cry, spoken by people who had never met me, but believed in what I represented. Ironically, I was becoming a symbol while being hidden from the world. The government, fearing my influence, began secret conversations. They offered me freedom on conditions. They wanted me to renounce the struggle, to denounce the ANC, to accept apartheid's version of peace. I refused. Freedom that requires silence is not freedom. It is another form of prison. Years later, they moved me from Robben Island to Pollsmoor Prison, then later to Victor Verster Prison. Conditions improved slightly. I had more space, more books, even a small garden. But my mind was sharper than ever. I understood something critical. Apartheid was collapsing under its own weight. Economically, morally, politically, it was unsustainable. The question was no longer if it would end, but how. And I was determined that it would end without civil war. Behind closed doors, I began negotiations, not as a prisoner begging for release, but as a leader preparing for transition. I spoke with government officials calmly, patiently, strategically. I assured them that democracy did not mean revenge, that equality did not mean domination. Trust, once broken, is not rebuilt with words. It is rebuilt with consistency. Then, on February 11, 1990, after 27 years of imprisonment, the gates opened. As I walked out, hand in hand with my wife Winnie, cameras flashed and crowds roared. The world saw a free man. What they did not see was the discipline required to walk forward without hatred, to smile without forgetting, to forgive without excusing injustice. I addressed the nation and the world with one clear message. The time for healing had come. But freedom is not the end of the struggle. It is the beginning of responsibility. South Africa stood on the edge of chaos. Violence threatened to tear the country apart. Mistrust ran deep. Decades of injustice cannot be undone with a single speech. I worked closely with F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid president. Many questioned this partnership. Some called it betrayal. But leadership is not about pleasing crowds. It is about preventing catastrophe. Together, we dismantled apartheid laws piece by piece. We negotiated a new constitution. We laid the groundwork for the first democratic elections in our nation's history. In 1993, we were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I accepted it not as an individual honor, but on behalf of millions who had suffered and resisted. Then came April 27, 1994. For the first time, South Africans of all races stood in the same lines, holding the same ballots, voting for the same future. Elderly men and women walked for miles just to mark an X. When the results were announced, I became South Africa's first democratically elected black president. I was 75 years old. Some expected revenge, others expected miracles. What they received was reconciliation. I invited my former jailers to my inauguration. I wore the green jersey of a national rugby team once seen as a symbol of white supremacy, and turned it into a symbol of unity. I established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not to forget the past, but to confront it honestly. Justice without truth is hollow. Peace without accountability is fragile. As president, I served only one term. Power, I believed, should never become permanent. Leadership is a relay race, not a throne. When I stepped down, I did so willingly, something rare in history and necessary for democracy to survive. In my later years, I focused on humanitarian work, education, and the fight against poverty and disease. I watched the world continue to struggle with inequality, division, fear. And I learned this final truth. Freedom is not a destination. It is a daily responsibility. I passed from this world in 2013, but my story was never meant to end with me. It was meant to remind humanity that ordinary people, armed with courage and compassion, can reshape history. If there is one lesson my life offers, it is this. It always seems impossible until it is done. When people speak of my life, they often focus on the extraordinary moments, the prison gates opening, the crowds cheering, the presidency, the prizes. But history is not built only in moments of triumph. It is shaped in silence, in patience, in the daily discipline of choosing principle over comfort. I want to speak now not as a symbol, but as a man who has lived long enough to understand the cost of leadership. Power is a strange thing. I had spent nearly 3 decades without it, stripped of even the smallest choices, when to sleep, what to eat, when to speak. And then suddenly I stood at the highest office of my nation. The temptation to hold on, to control, to settle scores, it is real. I felt it. Any honest leader would admit that. But leadership is not about feeding the ego. It is about serving a future you may not live to see. South Africa was a wounded nation. Apartheid had not only divided races, it had poisoned trust. Generations had been taught fear. Fear of each other. Fear of loss. Fear of justice. My greatest responsibility was not writing laws or giving speeches. It was helping people imagine a shared future. Reconciliation was not popular. Many who had suffered deeply wanted punishment. Many who had benefited from apartheid wanted silence. Both sides misunderstood reconciliation. They thought it meant forgetting. It did not. Reconciliation means remembering, without hatred. That is why we established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victims were given a voice, perpetrators were forced to face the truth. It was painful, at times, unbearable. But healing without truth is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. I knew that if South Africa descended into revenge, we would destroy everything we had fought to build. History is filled with revolutions that replaced one form of oppression with another. I refuse to let ours be one of them. During my presidency, I focused on unity, education, housing, and dignity. Progress was slower than many hoped. Some still criticize me for not doing more, faster. I understand that criticism. Leadership does not happen in a vacuum. It happens within limits, resistance, and compromise. But let me be clear, freedom does not erase inequality overnight. It creates the opportunity to confront it honestly. After one term, I stepped aside. Some could not understand why. They believed power was something to be held, protected, extended. But democracy must be bigger than any one individual. A leader who clings to power teaches the nation to do the same. Stepping down was one of the most important decisions of my life. In my later years, my body weakened, but my concern for humanity deepened. I watched the world closely. I saw nations rise and fall. I saw technology connect us and divide us. I saw old forms of injustice wearing new disguises. I saw that the struggle for freedom did not end with apartheid. It continues wherever people are judged by the color of their skin, where education is denied because of poverty, where fear is used as a political weapon, where truth is bent for power. To those in the United States, I want to say this. Your history, like ours, is complex. It is marked by courage and contradiction, progress and pain. The measure of a nation is not whether it has been perfect, but whether it has been willing to confront its imperfections. Democracy is fragile. It requires participation, responsibility, and moral courage. Do not assume it will survive on its own. It must be defended, peacefully, persistently, and thoughtfully. I was often called a hero. I never felt comfortable with that word. Heroes are imagined as fearless, flawless, larger than life. I was none of those things. I was afraid many times. I doubted myself. I made mistakes. What sustained me was not heroism, but purpose. I believed that every human being is born with equal dignity. I believed that systems can be changed. I believed that even those who oppress can learn to listen. Most importantly, I believe that forgiveness is not weakness. It is one of the strongest acts a human being can choose. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting injustice. It means refusing to let injustice define your future. As I reflect on my life, I do not see a straight path. I see struggle, detours, failures, and moments of grace. I see the faces of those who walked with me, and those who paid a price I did not. If my story means anything, let it mean this. Change does not require perfection. It requires persistence. You do not need to be powerful to begin. You need to be committed. And when the world tells you something is impossible, remember this. Every system of injustice once appeared permanent. Every freedom enjoyed today was once unthinkable. I was born a village boy. I became a prisoner. I became a president. But above all, I remained a servant of the people. My journey was never meant to inspire admiration. It was meant to inspire action. Because the greatest prison is not the one with bars. It is the one built from fear, silence, and indifference. And the greatest freedom is not walking out of a cell. It is helping others believe they can walk free too.